This is KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Hello, good people, and welcome to this episode of 10 Things here on KC Sports Network. I'm BJ Kissel, hanging out with Hayley Lewis. You might have caught her on the KCSN Live postgame show the last couple of weeks. Did a great job alongside Kent, Craig, Maddie, and Tucker. Hayley, good to see you again.
Appreciate it. I almost called them the boys at home, you know? Bringing it back.
That was entertaining for, I put it on social. There were many reasons it was entertaining.
Yes.
We were trying a lot of new things with the KCSN postgame show, being in different locations and going back and forth, different people helping us out, but having a lot of fun, doing a phenomenal job. It's going to be a great season of covering it. So make sure you are watching the Chiefs game and you want to catch some post-game analysis, some post-game updates, and post-game thoughts. Join us on our YouTube channel every week. But thank you. Before we get into the show, thank you to our sponsor of 10 Things, Mission Taco Joint. Now with 3 locations in Kansas City, including their new one out in Leawood. We appreciate not only their support of this program, but also of the KCSN Foundation. Mission Taco Joint was generous enough to help support our Feed It Forward program and provide meals every month to Hope Faith Ministries in downtown Kansas City. We'll be providing meals alongside Mission Taco Joint and serving that food once per month. If you're interested in supporting or being a part of this program, let us know. You can also get 10% off your order every Tuesday at any of the 3 KC area Mission Taco Joint locations by simply mentioning KCSN. So thank you to Mission Taco Joint. Hayley, I'm already hungry.
I know. Taco Tuesday's tomorrow. We got one more day.
Yeah.
We can power through. We'll go get those tacos downtown.
Absolutely going to happen. All right, Hayley, we've got 10 things that are top of mind for us right now regarding the Kansas City Chiefs following their second preseason game. If you've listened to this show before, you kind of know how it goes. If not, it's a lot easier in the regular season.
Yeah.
We get into this stuff, but it's more to talk about during the regular season. But here are 10 things that are just kind of top of mind for us right now. Hey, let's have you get things started.
Okay, the meat and potatoes. The Chiefs were better this week.
Yes.
I think that's the easiest way to say it. Last week, you see them go against the Saints. Things started off a bit dicey this week. I think you can put all those doubts to bed that the offense is going to get there. They have a whole other week to get there as well before they get there by the home opener on Thursday Night Football. But a much more efficient start. We got to see Mahomes kind of fall into things. I think people on Twitter were freaking out right in the beginning because the first couple of drives, but by the third series, things start to look smooth. They buckled down. The biggest thing that stood out to me, Mahomes targeted 10 different receivers and made 9 connections with 9 different receivers. I think that's wonderful to show just how the depth chart goes with this team and what we can look forward to next.
I think he's ready to go.
Yeah.
I think he's on
Looking
top of it. It's interesting. So I'll talk out of both sides of my mouth, and I completely understand I'm being a hypocrite here that I'll tell you it doesn't matter what happens in the preseason outside of no new injuries, which, let's be honest, if we're talking about the 10 most important things coming from that game on Saturday against the Cardinals, it was the fact that the Chiefs did not have any injuries that they needed to talk about. So that's what you want to see. But outside of that, you don't really care what happens. They're not game planning. They're not doing matchups, all things that has made Andy Reid a Hall of Fame coach. The reason he's one of the best to do it. They're not doing any of that kind of stuff. So it's like, I don't care when it's bad, but when it's good, I'm going to feel good.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just hedging my emotions and being like, oh, it doesn't matter if they don't look great. But you want to see success at least at some point during the preseason. You want to see them get into a rhythm with guys, making plays. It's nice to see Mahomes honestly get outside the pocket a little bit.
Right.
Some of the Mahomes magic stuff that we've seen from him. But it kind of takes us into the second point, Hayley, about just loving to see the offense be better. But the Chiefs offense specifically is the number 2 point here. And that was the fact they had 504 yards of total offense.
I didn't realize that until I went and looked at it.
It's hard when there's so many different quarterbacks coming in and like you don't know who's in there
happening.
and trying to figure out who was it that just made that catch. Who's that guy? But 504 yards of total offense, 27 first downs, 6 of 9 on third down, obviously with the 38-10 win. Pretty impressive. And the 4 quarterbacks were all very, very good.
Yeah, and I think that's the best thing that we saw was the clean sheet, whatever, from all the quarterbacks. That was really cool to see all of them come in, play well. It's always great to see Mahomes do well, but we already know he's going to do well. It's not even a concern. It's just more to see how are the other quarterbacks going to fall in line, who comes off the bench when Mahomes gets hurt, those certain things. And I think a little controversy, which kind of even leads us into our next point, which we'll get to in a second, about the quarterbacks. There is no controversy, but maybe there is at QB number 2. I mean, potentially.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. So going through their box scores here real quick. Blaine Gabbert, all right, let's start with Mahomes. Mahomes goes 10 of 15 for 105 yards, average 7 yards per attempt with a touchdown, passer rating of 109. He's actually 4th on the passer rating ranked with the
Think they'll
4
cut it?
quarterbacks who played. I like his chances of making the squad. All right, so who came in second? Shane Buechele, which was the big storyline because everybody just kind of thought that Blaine Gabbert would at least be that guy, and this kind of started that conversation again of, is Shane Buechele have a legitimate chance of knocking Blaine Gabbert out of being that backup quarterback? Shane Buechele goes 10 of 10 for 105 yards. Twitter is absolutely exploding, just giving him the job. And then Blaine Gabbert comes out and absolutely tears it up, going 7 of 8 for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns with a 158.3 perfect quarterback rating. And then Chris Alodican, I don't know if I said that correctly, I apologize, goes 4 of 5 for 63 yards, averaging 12.6 yards per attempt with a passer rating of 118.8. All 4 quarterbacks look good. But Hayley, to your point, this is the perfect Andy Reid quote for the preseason.
Right.
It's a non-answer, but he kind of talks about something.
It alludes to what he meant.
He was asked after the game about the fact that Shane Buechele came in instead of Blaine Gabbert second. And this is what Andy Reid, this is from the Chiefs PR quotes. Well, this was a game that Chiefs quarterback Blaine Gabbert wasn't scheduled to play. Normally the third guy goes, but both of them played great. And that's a good thing that they both played really good football.
Okay.
It's a great thing that they played good football.
We're all happy. And it's an Andy Reid quote in and out. I mean, that's perfectly sums up the way that the guy does his post-game pressers. But it was the controversy of Twitter during the game.
Yeah.
Then you get an answer, he wasn't even scheduled to play. That's why Shane went out with the 2s. But then my question after that, following that up, is then why did they pull Shane? If he wasn't scheduled to play, why did they put Gabbert back out there? If they truthfully didn't have him playing and he was maybe going to potentially play against the Browns when they come to Arrowhead next week, then why pull Shane? Shane was having a great day. Maybe it's because it was all perfect and it's let's not mess it up.
Tucker, do you have a tinfoil hat? Because I will put it on. He was looking too good. They were worried about losing him, but they're like, pull this guy out. Sorry, Blaine, we knew you thought you had the day off, but this guy's absolutely killing it, and he's not going to make the practice squad. Right. We leave him out on the field. He's doing this. There's all kinds of reasons that it could be, and we don't know what the truth is, but it did lead to interesting conversations regarding, all right, what's Blaine Gabbert's contract? Like, is it even feasible for him to do this? And somebody I don't remember who it was, but somebody said like his contract was guaranteed. So I went and looked it up. Blaine Gabbert signed a 1-year, $1.3 million deal, $1.0925 million guaranteed.
Let it stay in.
That's a good enough money, but it's not so much money that they wouldn't eat $1 million in dead cap if they thought that it would help them somewhere else on the roster be able to keep someone else, because they just keep 2 quarterbacks because they trust that Shane Buechele could be the guy. The other aspect of this, Hayley, that's really interesting, Andy Reid generally, except in the Patrick Mahomes time, likes veteran backup quarterback. He was Chad Henne for the longest time, even before that, when like Matt Moore.
Exactly. We've seen it before.
Right. We've seen it before because you want those veteran guys who have gone in there and done it before. I'm curious, at some point, he's not the young guy anymore. And we look at Shane Buechele, doesn't have a lot of experience. He signed in 2021. He's been in this offense around Patrick Mahomes the last 2+ years. So he knows this offense better than Blaine Gabbert, if we're being honest. I mean, that's making a giant assumption. I'm not in the room. That I understand this is an assumption, but for a player who's been here for 2 years, I'm assuming he knows some of the ins and outs. He's had the experience of sitting in rooms with Patrick Mahomes, preparing for huge games against the Cincinnati Bengals, against the Buffalo Bills. And Hayley, you've been in that locker room. Yeah. The backup quarterback's job, besides coming in and winning a couple of games, picking up some key third downs like anything is possible, it made him a legend.
To be the support to Mahomes.
Right. It's that sounding board. And they're close. We see him hanging out in the off the field.
That boy's
say that he and Blaine aren't close. Not about that. But he might be not necessarily a veteran, but more experienced to be the quote-unquote veteran in the way that we talk about it and what you need from a backup quarterback.
Then yes, what we see I follow that point. It might rather not necessarily the fact that he needs to be 36 years old or 38 years old, but he needs to be someone who's going to keep Mahomes calm, cool, collected. Also, someone to speak with him on the sideline, someone to bring him back in, someone who knows Andy Reid's offense like the back of their hand, someone who has that experience in the playoffs. And although Shane wasn't in those certain games, he's been along for the ride. So I think Twitter maybe would have ran with it like we all did during the game. Then we get Andy Reid's answer at the end of it. And I think now what is to bring into question is the fact that we'll see what happens next week. Like you said, we're not in that room. Everything we're saying is just speculation. It's very likely that both of these quarterbacks will be on the 53-man roster. It's just who comes off the bench when Mahomes gets hurt. If not when, if. that ever happens.
And I think Shane Buechele may have played so well that there's a team out there that doesn't have their quarterback situation figured out. That's like, you know what? He could be one of our top 3 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So if the Chiefs need to only have 2 quarterbacks on their active roster or on their 53 because they have so much depth everywhere else, if they don't feel like they can cut Shane Buechele on that first round of 53, he passes through waivers. And we'll get to that here on the 4th point. It's a good transition here.
The trimming.
We'll get to that. Well, I'll finish that point after I explain this, because the roster deadline, it is different this year. It's different in 2023. It's Tuesday, August 29th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everything in the league is always 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when they do stuff like this. But the roster has to be trimmed from 90 players down to 53. So over the next weeks, expect to see everybody's projected 53 man rosters. It's all the Chiefs content you're going to see over the next week are projected 53 man rosters.
Better than how we've done it in years past, where it was a slow trim after each preseason.
I do. I think the coaches are going to like it a lot more because you have more players that could play in the final game that it doesn't matter. The problem is you'd trim it down, and by the time you get to that final preseason game, you'd have fewer players, but that's the one that you'd want the majority of your guys who are going to play. You don't want them playing at all. So it kind of puts the coaches in a tricky position. I always thought, and this is interesting story for anyone that's followed me for a while, I've talked about this before, in that the part that was always seemed stressful to me if you just have the one cut and everybody gets released is on the scouting side, the pro personnel department, where you have these pro personnel scouts who are scouting and trying to find players that may get released on other teams to try and strengthen your roster. And when you cut from 90 to 53 on the same day, 32 NFL teams, 37 players getting cut. That's 1,184 players that are all getting released at the same time. Well, you're a pro personnel guy and you're trying to figure out which players could benefit our team. That's almost 1,200 players that you're sorting through. And they have this system, that's a software program where you're scouting throughout the preseason. You tag guys that you like. And then the software, as soon as the players get released, it spits out to you. Here are the players you tagged that you like that just got released. So they're not sorting through all this stuff like manually. It's this like software, and you expect that it has it, but it's cool to hear them talk about how they can tag them in different ways. And then it spits out these reports saying, hey, 1,200 guys just got released. Here are the 6 that you tagged that you like that got released. So it speeds up that process for the scouting department. But yeah, going back to the quarterback situation, is releasing Blaine Gabbert because you don't think Shane Buechele can be on the practice squad. Because you make the practice squad, you're part of that initial cut.
Yeah. Go
through waivers. Some other team, based on the way he's played, and again, maybe you just want to take a flyer on a young quarterback, they could see Shane Buechele. If the Chiefs don't want to lose him, maybe it's worth that $1 million.
It's interesting. It's going to be a interesting Tuesday. We got what, a week and a day away? Wow. Is it really that time?
It is crazy when thinking about it.
When we talk about the quarterbacks, another thing to talk about, though, is also the wide receiver room. That's always biggest controversy going into that cut. There's a lot of young guys, a lot of veteran guys. Also, this is the now second year in the road that the Chiefs have lost their biggest producer at wide receiver. You know, you lose Tyreek Hill, then you lose Juju Smith-Schuster last year. Now who's going to step up? It's all about MVS. It's all about Sky Moore. Now we have 2 or 3 rookies really basically doing a pretty good job. Then you have Kadarius Toney, who's injured. So there's a lot of names we're throwing out here. In your opinion, how many, I mean, you've been around the team for a while too. Wide receiver room is a good one to keep bolstered up. How many do you see them keeping when Mahomes can hit 9 out of 10 targets in a preseason game?
Yeah, it's going to be the most interesting, I think, thing going into this, because it could set a precedent that we've never seen from Andy Reid. And this is courtesy of Joseph Hefner, does analytics for us on our Substack, kcsn.substack.com. Joseph had put this out on his social media account. It's just a graphic. It's very organized. I actually quote tweeted it earlier. So I know some of this information is probably hard to take in audio wise. I'm a visual person. You need to see it.
I feel like
go onto my social media. You can see.
What are you getting at?
You can see the graphic, but no, it starts in 2013 and it goes every year all the way through 2022, every position group, how many players he's kept at that position group.
I follow.
From he's been here, and then it's like an average. Well, the interesting thing, and specific to your point, Andy Reid has never kept more than 6 wide receivers on the initial 53-man roster.
Okay.
It's been 6, every year but 3. And the last 2 years, he'd only kept 5 receivers for an average, again, during his, 10 years here, of 5.7 wide receivers on average on the roster. And again, has never kept 7 wide receivers. Well,
I see.
Here are 7 wide receivers. If the Chiefs do keep 7, again, for the first time, you have MVS, Sky Moore, Richie James, Rashee Rice, Justin Watson, Justin Ross, and Kadarius Toney. Unless Kadarius Toney starts on IR in some way, or he makes the initial 53, then they have to take him off, because if you get put on IR before the initial 53, your season is done. So you have to wait until the after. So you have to make the initial roster. Any player who's injured like Kadarius Toney, if he can't play or they're going to put him on IR, they're going to make him, he's going to be on the initial 53, go through the waivers, then they can put him on IR, and then he can officially come back later that season. But anyway, it's a really cool graphic if you're trying to play that game of how can we fit 53 guys and what have they done in the past. It's just offensive line is one of the ones that tends to rotate quite a bit. Defensive line tends to rotate quite a bit, but between quarterback and wide receiver, interesting ones.
It's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. Let's talk about one of them. Wide receiver rookie, Rashee Rice, right?
Looked good.
Had a good game.
I like that he bounced back from a mistake. Makes a big drop. People talk about it. And he comes back.
Right. And that's the mental game of the NFL, right? And to be able to do so on national television in front of a ton of people, and to be able to pick up, bounce back, get right back on it. You finished the day with 96 yards leading the team. I mean, it was his, I hate to even say breakout, let's put the quotations around it, but a very good showing in the second preseason game for him. Potentially a guy who we could see have big numbers this season. Reed afterwards saying, when reporters brought to, of course, this is an Andy Reid quote, they bring to him the fact, okay, was he having more numbers than usual? Was he purposely put in there more often, or called upon more often than others? And he goes, his number just got dialed up. We just called him, he picked up, texted us back, and there he's on the field, Number just, that's just, it is what it is. Sometimes things shake out that way. He continued to do good. They kept putting him on the field. It works out. Mahomes also saying back in OTAs that you could see his talent. He's a guy who helps them showcase why the roster is going to be so deep at that position, but also he has all the confidence in this kid, and he steps up and shines when the moment is brightest. End quote, Patrick Mahomes.
Haley, you've been in the locker room. You've talked to these players when they've gotten drafted, these young wide receivers in this offense. Yeah, and it's always like they're eager, but it's always a little bit of like deer in the headlights because of how much mentally is being put on them that they're not used to. Yeah. And for a player to come out and for Mahomes to say those kinds of things, they're always going to say positive things.
Sure.
But you can kind of read between the lines on like how much are they praising them. And with Rashee Rice, it seems like it's a lot of genuine. And that's not to say that there's not a lot of things that Rashee Rice probably isn't 100% comfortable with yet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it doesn't seem too big for him at this point.
And like you said, a deer in the headlights. That's even with just having an interview, right? And a lot of the times the guys during the preseason, as you know, they'll throw the rookies into the scrum where all the reporters are basically just, this is where the microphone is, and they have absolutely no room to even breathe with reporters on them. And they have to stay calm, cool, collected and be able to say exactly what they need to get out, and also hope that the one mishap or one mispronunciation of something doesn't get just torn apart into pieces by the reporters for one phrase. So it's a lot to handle. You have to handle the media. You have to handle the playbook, as we know, which is even harder. And you have to handle being on the field when you make mistakes and bouncing back. That maturity is something I think is more significant than him having an even better game.
That's
maturity to come back, to bounce back from what he did, to get right back on it and be like, hey, I got this. I know what I'm doing. A lot of guys would just crumble under that kind of pressure. And I think if he can continue to do that in this next preseason game, then that's a guy we're going to see a lot of this season.
Yeah, and they're going to need to count on him. And that's where the kind of the locker room and the guys supporting around him.
Yep.
And be able to look around and see guys like Travis Kelce and guys that it's not like you're in the room with other guys that haven't had that level of success that you're still not going to listen to them. But when you're talking about the greatest tight end to ever play the game and the greatest quarterback to ever play the game, you're surrounded by people that you don't have to question are those habits, is what they're doing what will get me to that level. You always want to have that blind trust, but there is no blind trust anymore. You see, they're really blind about it. They're wearing rings. They've got trophies everywhere. Do what you see your teammates doing, and that's the process that will get you everything that you want to get in this sport, both individually and collectively as a team. We are going to break down. That's 5 things. We've got through 5. We've got 5 more. Talking about one player that you're going to hate to see leave, but I just don't see how he makes it. I'm going to talk about him. What we just talked about. One player that I'm going to hate to see leave. And I'm also going to tease. We've got an interview coming up with Rustin Dodd, writer for The Athletic, but also wrote the Patrick Mahomes book, Kingdom Quarterback. Interesting history of Kansas City, history of Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Interesting book. Excited to talk to Rustin here at the end of this episode. So hang around, but we'll be right back after this quick.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
What is up, Chiefs Kingdom? We got to interrupt today's podcast to tell you about our friends at Factor. And with the busy season just around the corner, school's starting up, football's starting up, sports are starting back up for this season. You might be looking for some wholesome, convenient meals for these jam-packed days. And Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up with fresh, chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Too busy with your end-of-summer goals to cook, but want to make sure you're eating well? With Factor, skip the extra trip to the grocery store and the chopping and the prepping and the cleaning up while still getting the flavor and the nutritional quality that you need. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy to get back to crushing your goals. Refresh your healthy habits without missing a beat. You can choose from 34 weekly flavor-packed dietitian-approved meals ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And then you can level up as well with their Gourmet Plus options prepared to perfection by chefs ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. I put in an order with Factor. I got a chef's choice, so I'm excited to see what they send me there with Factor. So here's what you got to do. You got to head to factormeals.com/KCSN50 and use code KCSN50 to get 50% off. That's code KCSN50 at factormeals.com/KCSN50 to get 50% off. Now let's get back to the show.
Welcome back to 10 Things and BJ Kissel. We're hanging out with Hayley Lewis here at the KCSN World Headquarters, the show presented by our friends over at Mission Taco Joint. We teased going into this break, Hayley, that there's going to be players that you hate to see leave. And that's part of the Brett Veach Chiefs, personnel departments kind of across the Bears, that the better they are at their job, the harder their job becomes. The more talent they bring in, the harder it's going to be let guys go. And there's going to be times where we end up letting guys go that 2-3 years down the road become dudes for other teams just because you can't get everything 100% right. I'm hoping this next guy that we're about to talk about doesn't become a dude for another team, because he stepped up, had 4 receptions for 92 yards and a touchdown last Saturday against the Arizona Cardinals. I'm talking about Emir Smith-Marset, the wide receiver. We just named off 7 wide receivers, and could it be the first time that Andy Reid in his tenure in Kansas City keeps 7 wide receivers in the initial 53, and it's not including Emir Smith-Marset, who showed out in a big way. I think showed some stuff. He's going to be on an NFL roster somewhere.
And I know we've said this a lot. I've said this multiple times before, but Brett Veach would literally trade his own mother away if it meant the Kansas City Chiefs win the Super Bowl. And no matter how good of a person the player is, how wonderful they are off the field with their teammates in the locker room, it just comes down to business. And what we just talked about before the break, all the wide receivers that we're talking through, and that's even hard to narrow down. And those are guys we feel pretty locked in on. This is a great talent. But even Nate Taylor tweeted it out on Twitter. Another NFL team is going to reap the benefits, the Chiefs developing Emir Smith-Marset. So it's unfortunate. It's the way that it goes. I don't see him landing here unless something blows my mind next week.
Yeah, and I know I've seen a few things, not a lot, but just on social saying, well, if they're not good, just trade them. Some team will trade for them. Every other team has pro personnel guys who are going to look at our roster and say, they don't have enough room for him. We don't have to trade for him unless you don't think he'll pick you or you're low on the waiver wire. There are reasons why a trade could still make sense.
Sure.
You can control the fact that he would come to you, doesn't have to go through waivers, so maybe, but you don't have a lot of leverage because teams know you can't keep them all. If that's a player that somehow ends up on the practice squad, will be an absolute phenomenal thing for the Kansas City Chiefs. But Emir Smith-Marset was a 5th-round pick in 2021 out of Iowa by the Vikings. He's played in 14 games in his career with the Vikings and the Bears, who he spent some time with last year before he came over to Kansas City. But Hayley, thing that I loved seeing from him, he had, like I said, 4 catches for the 92 yards on Saturday. But he showed a little bit of everything on each one of those plays. On the first catch, it was a deep corner route where he got over the defense, showed his speed, showed his ability to track the football. And it's one of those, you're running those corner routes, you're running away from the wide receiver, you're catching over your outside shoulder. Talk about like those outfield turns, right? Like an outfielder in baseball, looking one way over shoulder, then flipping and looking the other way. It's not easy to do, and it's easy to see guys not be able to track the ball and find it and make a play. But the fact that he did that on his first one made a big catch for a huge gain. And then on his next one, you saw a little pivot route, which he kind of stumbled through. I don't want to say it was the cleanest route anyone's ever run, that little pivot whip route, whatever you want to call it. But as soon as he caught it, he took a shot from the safety. We'll give some credit or be fair here. It wasn't the greatest tackle attempt, but you saw a safety come downhill, gives him a pop. And for a receiver that saw have the speed to get over the top of a defense, track the ball and catch it, for that same receiver to have the physical ability to catch a quick route across the middle, take a shot from a safety, have the contact balance to not go down, but then turn the corner. And
the timing of that.
I call it athletic fluidity. I don't know what else to call it. We say it with Bobby Street, the running in the semicircles, whatever you call that athleticism. You take a shot, you turn that ankle, you turn your body and then explode up the field.
Right.
That's a completely different kind of skill set. So you've seen two completely different types of skill sets on two catches for him. And then on his third one, it was just a nice little hook route. But then on the last one, it was a back shoulder catch, which takes a lot of timing, a lot of practice, and it's a lot more difficult than it looks. And then he drug a defender like 5 yards after that catch for his last one, almost scoring his second touchdown. And so you saw the speed down the field, the ability to track a ball. You saw the physicality, being able to basically shut off a blocker, immediately get up the field and score a touchdown. And his last one, more of a refined back shoulder, kind of a, I won't say passive, but more of a skill type of practice play that's not easy to do. It's not a physical thing. That takes a lot of reps and a lot of work ethic to be able to do something like that. And then again, the physicality to drag a defender. Again, you show those three plays to any team, I guarantee you he's going to be one of the 6 best wide receivers on one of the 32 teams in the NFL.
I mean, you seem pretty solid in your feeling about him not making it here in KC. I think a lot of people would agree with you as well. Not to say that that's any bit wrong, but if he was going to take a spot of someone, who would be your first person you would mix? I know we didn't rehearse that. I just threw it on you, but
it's not that. It's that it's not easy because Justin Watson is making this team. I've seen that on social media. I'm telling you, Justin Watson if Justin Watson doesn't make the Chiefs roster, I will donate $500 to some charity. You can call me out on social media all you want. He is going to make this roster. What?
I just have a charity bank account.
You tell me what charity to send it to. The first person I see on social media that listens to this and names a legitimate, nice charity, I will donate $500 if he doesn't make the initial 53-man roster. I'll put my money where my mouth is. It's not Justin Watson. The cop-out answer would be maybe Kadarius Toney, but that would just because he wouldn't make the initial 53. He has to make the initial 53, so it's not. Richie James has looked good. I don't know who it would be. I'm trying to figure out an IR something or other, and
you'd have to move some pieces. It's something that I would need time to answer. I just threw it on you.
Unless you're trading Richie James or somebody like that, but I don't know why they would do that.
I think that's one of the weakest links. But let's talk about another Justin. Okay, Justin Ross, the kid who has the best story probably in the league right now, sits out due to injury. He's technically a rookie now, first-year player. Beginning of the game, Chiefs are struggling. He's able to step up big. Mahomes connects with him, 12-yard gain, gets him into the Cardinals territory. That's another guy. He only had 2 receptions, 18 yards. But this is, again, another kid who he showed up against the Saints. He shows up again. He plays his role. He might not have stood out as much as other receivers. You're not going to do that every single game. You're not going to be a star of every game. But what Mahomes said about Ross afterwards is what stood out to me. So he says, in quotes, "It was a good play. We wanted him singled up to see what he could do. He's been making those plays happen all training camp, and I think you have all seen that. It's a lot of trust that we have going within him to win the assignment. He ran a great route, lost the defensive back, caught the ball, got up the field, great catch. I think, again, if you have Mahomes saying things about you post-game, and it's positive, we have trust in him. You've seen those things all season long. And we're there in the media, too. We've heard Mahomes. I mean, he's not going to ever bash a player or say something.
Right.
But for him to use the words trust, you've been seeing it happen all training camp. I think that stands big and will carry through for him. So I'm excited to see how he does throughout the rest of the year. That was another good performance for him. Might not have been the greatest thing in the world, but next week we'll see him hopefully continue to build on what he did in week 1.
I think it was important for those of us that really pay attention to like the roster snaps and who's playing with who, that Justin Ross in the first preseason game wasn't on the field with Mahomes.
Right.
And then this time he was on the field with Mahomes. They made a connection. And it wasn't for me. I'm not going to go too much because we've seen it from Justin Ross consistently. For people who are at practice every day, it was like, hey, this guy's pretty good. There were a lot of us that were like, hey, he's never stepped foot on the field. And for me, it always goes back. The Justin Ross conversation flipped when the DeAndre Hopkins stuff was happening, where it was some factions of Chiefs fans that we don't need DeAndre Hopkins. We have Justin Ross. Those of us that were like, whoa.
Okay, relax.
Not saying he might not be, but that's not a reason that Brett Veach should not bring him in, because a player's never stepped foot on the field is going to be
someone who's
a top 5 wide receiver over the last decade. So that's the part for me. But what gets me really excited physically and what we saw against the Cardinals on Saturday wasn't just that Justin Ross had the nice catch. It was that you have a 6'4", 210-pound receiver running a whip route that created that much separation. Those are normally the kind of routes you see from your slot, your inside guys that are breaking to the out,
right?
Trying to manipulate the safety, the linebacker, move some guys around. The fact that a receiver at his size can create that kind of separation, and granted, don't know who the DB was on it, playing in this division where you have Patrick Surtain, you have Asante Samuel Jr.
Sure.
You've got some dude, J.C. Jackson, if he comes back and plays the way that we've seen him play in his career. But maybe Ned's going to do that against starters. But that was a phenomenal route by a big receiver that you normally don't see those types of routes on the outside by guys his size.
And Mahomes even alluded to that, the fact that he was able to win the assignment. That's the biggest key, I think, in what you're saying and what I'm saying, is the fact that greatness is recognizing that. And who it was against, we might not know. It might not have been the ones that they were putting out on the field as well. But it shows the potential. It's a step in the right direction. It's something we hope potentially see next week. And from there on out, that's really all you can say.
It's not a but. It was, who was it against? He won that route. It was,
Agreed.
I'm still not ready to pencil him in as the number.
I think that's the best way to say it. Yes,
but he's definitely shown, and based on what's been said, that they're comfortable with him out here, and that's the biggest thing. Let's move on to another player that I'm very comfortable with, because I've said, going back to when they first signed him, my favorite move that the Chiefs made, not just from an impact, but from a contract and just fit standpoint, was linebacker Drew Tranquill. He's the second highest graded Chiefs defender through 2 preseason games, only behind Nick Bolton. But saw this, and I apologize. I think it was Matt Derrick on Twitter who said that Drew Tranquill also is the backup green dot, which means in a very short amount of time, Spags has shown trust in him to hand him that sort of responsibility. And the fact that he got here just this offseason, signed a 1-year, $3 million contract for a player who is going to be on the field a lot, a playmaking on the other side of the line of scrimmage linebacker. Fantastic move from Brett Veach. And just kind of a tag, because they signed very similar contracts. The third highest graded Chiefs defender this preseason, safety Mike Edwards, who also signed this offseason, 1 year, $3 million. We make a lot of credit, and obviously, praise the Chiefs for Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and all these guys. You do not win Super Bowls without players like Drew Tranquill and Mike Edwards at some point stepping up. So Brett Veach deserves a lot of credit for putting this roster together, what we've seen. I know we're about to talk about the offensive line that he worked on this offseason, but do not forget about players like Mike Edwards and especially Drew Tranquill. I think he's going to be a fan favorite, because I think he's going to be making those breaking up passes across the middle, making tackles for loss, those things that get Arrowhead going. I think he's going to end up being a fan favorite. And I've said that from the beginning.
I think, and on the sidelines, you also see him and Mahomes hang around a lot.
Yeah. One of them was kind of unfortunate on the interception at the end.
Yeah, did he?
Had the same exact reaction. He had the same exact reaction.
Does he think he's a Charger? Or, anyways,
you need to realize that you stand next to the quarterback, you're going to be on TV a lot.
Yeah. But it's a good thing. If they're hanging around, that's great. We love it. Let's go to the O-line, though. Talking about those offseason additions. You bring in Jawaan Taylor. That was the start. It was guard, tackle. What's it going to be? Now we see him falling into that tackle position. He also lines up with Donovan Smith on the other side of that. The duo doing well, keeping Mahomes squeaky clean in this past game. That was a big question in the offseason. Losing Orlando Brown Jr., also saying goodbye to Andrew Wiley, a little more shifting in that O-line. We've seen it happen ever since Super Bowl 54. And now it seems like, I don't want to be premature on these things, but this is all I have to talk about.
It was a big storyline.
It looked good.
And it's funny to go back now, because they've kind of settled into where I think most people kind of expected, but there was some, I'll say miscommunication, but it was just confusing there. After the Jawaan Taylor signing, maybe they didn't know that Donovan Smith was going to be available, because he was like, well, they can both play both positions, and Jawaan Taylor can play on the left, Donovan Smith can play on the right. And that's the one that never made sense to me. of, I know you pay Jawan Taylor a certain amount of money and that could be at left tackle, but
to be versatile, but
he's played right tackle. Dunham Smith has played left tackle. Do not put them in places that they haven't been playing. Put them where they're most comfortable, regardless of the money. And that's kind of where things seem to be headed as the team gets ready for the next preseason game. This is always an interesting week, Haley, because you have like a third of the Chiefs roster they're not paying attention at all to the preseason game. They are preparing for Detroit. And then you have another half or 2/3 of the roster that are going to play, that have to game plan and kind of not game plan, but kind of get ready to play in a football game where the rest of the guys are kind of studying. They're not paying attention at all about what's going to happen on Saturday. But yeah, it's always my favorite game, Haley. And I think last point talked through with all of this is I always like the last preseason game because it's guys living out there, not to be completely corny about it. These guys bust their ass. They work very, very hard, not only at camp to get on the field, but to put themselves in their lives to be in a position to step foot on the field and have their picture taken and try to get a clip that they can show their grandkids on social media. Like, hey, look what Granddad did. Like, when he was always staying close to Mahomes. But I enjoy watching it. Hopefully people out there listening to the show can appreciate, even if they don't watch the whole thing, catch part of it, that the people you're watching out there are literally living their dream, which I always enjoy watching. I don't care the sport. I don't care the situation. Find people that have dedicated their lives to something and appreciate watching it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and we got a whole nother week to do it. Talk about a whole lot of nothing, but a lot of great things going on. And then, we're opening up the regular season. It's almost time.
That was 9 things. And the 10th thing is a bonus this time. And like I said earlier in the show, going to have a chance to catch up with Rustin Dodd. Who's the author, along with Mark Dent, of Kingdom Quarterback. Got a copy of it right here. I'm about a third of the way through it. I read about 120 pages of this thing last night. It's a really cool read. I'm excited to talk to Rustin about it, but it's a really cool read for anybody who's from Kansas City, especially as a suburban kid. It talks about the J.C. Nichols and the history, which I kind of knew, but didn't quite know at the level of it. A lot of stuff with Mahomes I was aware of because I had a pretty good seat for that. But excited to catch up with Rustin right after this break. We'll see you.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network. Make sure you download our new app. Find it on the App Store or Google Play. Just search KC Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to 10 Things. And just like I said, going into this break, we have a special guest on to wrap up this episode. And we're talking with Rustin Dodd, writer for The Athletic, but he's also one of the 2 authors of Kingdom Quarterback. Like I was saying earlier, I got about 130 pages in last night, Rustin, and just a quick teaser for anybody who's listening, whether audio or video. Patrick Mahomes, the Kansas City Chiefs, and how a once swinging Cowtown chased the ultimate comeback. Rustin, I appreciate you coming on and having a chance to talk with us a little bit about your book.
No, thanks, VJ. I'm really glad to be on.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started recording just about how it's just a cool kind of mix of short stories. And as somebody that grew up in the Kansas suburbs and a lot of the history of the way that Kansas City, the way that it is now and how it got to this point, it's a really interesting read. And I knew a lot of these things, but didn't necessarily know it at the level and at the detail that you guys get to in this book. So the first question I have for you is just what led you to such a unique idea to put together a book that goes from, Patrick Mahomes and what it is now to kind of the history of Kansas City and how we got to this point? It's just a really creative way you guys put this together.
Yeah. So it all started probably after the Chiefs won their first Super Bowl. So this is like 2020, a few months after the Super Bowl, going into that next sort of like run it back season. And it seemed like, like the Chiefs were like, even at that time, it just seemed like, okay, this is going to be a dynasty. I don't know if you felt that way, but like it just seemed like they had everything football wise. And so I grew up, we're close to the same age. I think you're a little bit older than I am, but I grew up in Overland Park in like the 90s and graduated high school 2005. So that's like the era in which I grew up in. And like it just felt as I spent most of my like adulthood in Kansas City that like the city had just drastically changed from kind of the late 90s into like the 2000s and 2010s. And it just like the city had a lot of momentum, and obviously sports are a big part of that, but like just everything in the city just seemed to be kind of like a lot of changing, new energy, like new pride, like all these various things. And then it just seemed like that, Patrick Mahomes was this sort of like thunderbolt that was even like turbocharging the city even more. So when he arrived, the basic idea was like my co-author Mark Dent, who was also from Overland Park, like we wanted to write a book about Kansas City But it seemed like Patrick Mahomes was sort of like the perfect character to sort of help tell the story for many reasons. One, I mean, he's a fascinating, sports character, right? But it also just like the way we structure the book, and you sort of mentioned that it's sort of both of these stories simultaneously. It's like Patrick Mahomes' story, but then it's Kansas City's story. And like it seems like it's an easier way for somebody to kind of get through both stories, right? So like you don't have to spend 300 pages just reading straight history of Kansas City, which some people might find interesting, but like it might just be a little bit more of a slog to get through. So it's like if you can read 15 pages about some era of Kansas City that you might not be familiar with, and then you spend 15 pages reading about the 2017 draft. It's just like kind of a fun way to get through a book that has some like serious, topics and serious subject matter, but it's also just like our whole point was like, let's make a book that's fun that people will want to get through.
Hey, Rustin, what I took from it as I started reading through it, it was interesting for me because I grew up out in Stillwell, which is now considered Overland Park. They annexed all the way out there. Like during that time, I graduated from Blue Light High School in 2001. And so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, whether it's, Overland Park, Stillwell, it's all kind of the same general area. But I think it's really cool the way that you set it up. And a lot of things that I didn't know about the city that I grew up in, or the suburb of the city that I grew up in that, you talk about the history of jazz in Kansas City and how prevalent that was and how important that was to just the history and just who we are as a community right now. But the barbecue, the West Bottoms, Tom Pendergast, Liberty Memorial, and a lot of these things, and the way that you guys detail it and explain the pride that Kansas City has always had for its city that goes way beyond just Patrick Mahomes in this era that we're living in right now for people who are younger, who don't understand. And the takeaway that I had was when you talked about the Liberty Memorial and you told that story about the pride that Kansas City had in raising that $2.5 million themselves, and the way that the Kansas City Star got involved, and the way that it was this civic pride of, we're going to take care of, we're going to do this ourselves. We're going to have pride in our city. The way that you simultaneously told that story of the history of the pride of this city, and then kind of how through the 90s and through even after that, first run at the Super Bowls, and it's specific to the Chiefs, about how there was so much pride in this team. And then talking about Mahomes in the city, I'm not doing a great job of articulating this, but the way that you kind of symbiotically put those two things together to where it became a perfect fit, that the Chiefs hadn't drafted a quarterback since Todd Blackledge. They hadn't drafted a quarterback who had won them a football game in 30 years until Patrick Mahomes, which is the crazier part of that stat of not drafting a quarterback in the first round for 30 years, but not drafting a quarterback who ever won a football game for you for 30 years is crazy to think about. And it's just these two stories coming together that gives you a reason and the explanation why at a deeper level, there's this support and this crazy Patrick Mahomes was the perfect athlete at the perfect time in the right city for it to be exactly what we're experiencing right now. I just thought that part of it is really cool. It's hard to articulate, but you feel it when you're reading the book.
No, I mean, I could go on for like hours about the history of Kansas City, but like one thing that's really interesting when you go back and you like study all this stuff or research it and write about it is like how much history sort of like echoes over the time, right? So like if you go back 100 years, you would think that Kansas City would be a significantly different kind of place 100 years ago. And it was, but like the people very much are familiar, like the things they, were interested in, thought about, and like the pride they had in their city. Back in like the 1870s and 1880s, there was this big push. There was like this marketing plan in Kansas City, and it was called City of the Future. And it was like the idea that like, Kansas City was a young city at the time, but like the people who lived there was no really reason for it to like grow into something like, big and special. It was just kind of in the middle of the country. But like the people here like really, really believed and like felt so strongly like that this place could be something. And I still think like that sort of striving nature that Kansas City has, like it's still true today, right? So like I mean, it is an incredibly special place, but like it always feels like it's sort of like striving to get to that like next level. And that's kind of been true since the beginning.
I think the people of Kansas City were described, and it was in context, I believe, of stories back in the day, like the early 1900s. But it was like they're nice, polite, with a hint of self-doubt. That was the way that it was described. Like that is so perfectly describes everybody I grew up with, and it's just the quintessential, and just the way that you have things on the East Coast and the West Coast. Like you want to know how things are going to happen or how things are going to be affected. Go to the Midwest. Go to Kansas City. and just see this melting pot of people from back in the day and how it all came together. And some of it's good, some of it's not good. And it's interesting again, I think it's important for people to read and understand kind of how we got to this point. But the funniest thing, Rustin, and I was actually laughing out loud, I was trying not to wake my son up when I was reading it last night, that I was laughing out loud on, is for the first time in my life, I read through something that explained Kansas City, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, the river, how that real estate, how it all happened. And to get into the details the way that you guys did for this book was so funny that I think, Rustin, you need to record a video that, even if it's just reading the excerpt from the book, like that 4 pages as quick as you can, of just like how Kansas City got named. So every time anybody ever incorrectly says Kansas City, Kansas, or screws it up, everybody can just kind of like throw that meme to them, and it just explains exactly why everybody gets it wrong. And the history of Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas. I'm not gonna be able to explain it. If you want to, you can. But I was reading through it. I'm like, this would be a perfect response to anybody that gets that wrong, because we all know it happens all the time.
Yeah, well, I don't want to spoil the book, but what I will say is that it's so confusing that when I got an early copy and I was like proofreading, just kind of going through, like making sure there were no typos, and I read that part and I was so confused, and it's like I literally helped write the book. I wrote the book, but I still was so confused that I thought we got something wrong, and I like texted my co-author. I'm like, oh no. And then he's like, no, that's right. And it's because the entire situation makes no sense. It's like you have Kansas City, Missouri. They name it Kansas City before the state of Kansas even exists. Like then Kansas, the state comes along, and like the people in Kansas start accusing Kansas City of stealing their name, even though the state didn't even exist. And then there's like a river that is named for both of them. And it's just like the entire situation is incredibly confusing, but it's also funny because it's like we're in 2023, and like if you travel anywhere, like people get it wrong. So like, it's still today, the president gets it wrong. Everybody gets it wrong. So it's just kind of funny.
I thought it was funny just explaining how the guys like who made the decision, like it was not a big deal back then. Like they didn't even think about it. And every time you had to explain something, it was like, here's why this happened. And you have to know the context of the Missouri Compromise to understand why this mattered. And you have to understand why they didn't care if you went 20 miles outside of the city or 40 or 60 miles outside of the city, because it all looked kind of the same and they didn't see it as valuable. I just thought the whole way that it was explained, again, anybody from Kansas City could read through it and they'll be able to take something. And this is going to be one of those books, Rustin, I'm telling you, that I'll go back and read, maybe not the whole thing, but just parts of it all the time, because there's little excerpts in here. And again, for somebody that worked for the Kansas City Chiefs, who had a chance to interview Patrick Mahomes in the weeks and months leading up to the draft when he was a prospect, to talk to him about Kansas City and the Chiefs. And then when he gets drafted, and to kind of watch that maturation of the beginning of this dynasty, and, the start of arguably one of the best starts we've ever seen for a football player in NFL history. It's really cool the way that you guys did this. And again, for me personally, just kind of living through it, being a Kansas suburb kid that a lot of this stuff is affected by, and talking about the history of how the city set up the way that it was, but also the history of Patrick Mahomes and how he ended up here.
No, for sure. I mean, thank you for one. And it's like, I was doing another interview recently where it is one thing when like all this information is in one place. It's like, it's fascinating to think about all the what ifs, right? Or like all the little moments that had to happen for this to be like our reality, right? So like, whether it's the 2017 draft, whether it's like Patrick Mahomes' story in high school when he's not even a full-time quarterback until his junior year, whether it's like all of these little moments that had to have happened for this to be what happened. I don't know. It's like, it's kind of cool to think about.
Yeah, it's special. And again, I think it's the right guy in the right spot in the right city that embraced him and that needed the quarterback. It just, again, you couldn't write it better as far as the script of Patrick Mahomes and his background, his story, and the Chiefs' history of not just the city, but of the organization and the lack of drafting a quarterback and just needing that guy. And again, I haven't got all the way through it. I'm really curious the stuff with Alex Smith. And I've said this from the beginning, that they should build an Alex Smith statue right next to the Patrick Mahomes one for how important he was at the beginning part of his career. And you can talk to Lee Stenberg, you can talk to Chris Cabot of what Alex Smith meant to Mahomes that year that he redshirted. It was so special. Now, before we let you go and get your final thoughts, Rustin, just where can people find this book? What else can you tell us about it to make sure that people get it, and some of the things you have going on surrounding it?
Yeah. Well, you can pretty much order it anywhere, Amazon, any independent local bookseller. It'll be out Tuesday, August 22nd. So this week, tomorrow as we're recording this. But yeah, any Barnes & Noble in Kansas City should have it. Most Barnes & Nobles probably across the country should at least have a copy or two. So yeah, you can pretty much get it anywhere. I mean, Amazon is the easiest place, if you want to throw some love to your local bookseller and kind of find them and order it through them, you can always do that too. But yeah, BJ, no, this has been great. And we just kind of hope people, it's a, like, as I said, it's a way to sort of enjoy the last, 5 or 6 years of Chiefs history while also kind of, reading about the entire history of Kansas City.
All right, Austin, before I let you go, I want to get your favorite thing that you either studied or learned or kind of dove into that, again, being from Kansas City, that maybe you didn't know before you started writing this book. Give me one on Kansas City and one on the Mahomes side of just something that you really enjoyed or a fun story in going through the process of writing this book, is going through some of the acknowledgments at the end. You've been working on this for a while, some of these interviews and some of the stuff that you've gathered. Just what was your favorite thing about Kansas City and favorite thing about learning about Mahomes?
Well, the Kansas City, I probably could think of more, but this is the one that's coming to my head right away. Kansas City held the Democratic National Convention in 1900. And there's a whole story behind this because they built this big convention center to bring things to town. I mean, it's obviously that story, that still happens today. But it was a big moment for the city to have this national convention. It was putting Kansas City on the national map. And 3 months before the convention, the thing burned to the ground, and it was really new. So they had to rebuild it in 3 months, and everybody in Kansas City was like, "Screw it, we're doing it. We're going to rebuild this thing." But my favorite little detail from this story is that all these bigwigs, political people, they're all in town. It's a big moment for the city, and so they had all the local people who were kind of the local kind of ambassadors or guides or those kind of people. They gave them all T-shirts and they gave them buttons that said, "I'm from Kansas City. Ask me about it." And I just found it funny because it's what does anybody from Kansas City do when they go anywhere? It's all right, I gotta put my Kansas City shirt on because hopefully somebody might ask me about it or whatever. People, nobody wears more Kansas City stuff than people who are actually from Kansas City. So I thought that was funny. And I don't know, there's a ton of Mahomes stuff that I found fascinating. I mean, a lot of these stories people know, right? The stories are familiar. The Alex Smith chapter was fun. I enjoyed just really diving into how much that relationship went both ways, because I think, it's not only that Alex Smith was who he was, but I don't know that he reacts a certain way unless Patrick Mahomes is the way he is, right? So it's that kind of two-way relationship but maybe the most interesting Mahomes thing was just studying the Mahomes family in East Texas. We kind of traced it back a few generations. So, Patrick's grandfather is a guy named Johnny Mahomes. And, he was the valedictorian of his high school, class in the 60s. And then, his father and his father before them. And you sort of just see the family foundation, right? They're just were high achievers and hard workers, for decades in East Texas. And so kind of seeing that, how, a family evolves over a few generations and the different people, I found that just really interesting.
Yeah. A couple things. One, when you told me the story about the Democratic National Convention and the building burning down, the one detail I remember, because I was reading through that was part of what I read last night, was before it had even finished burning, they were already on the phone with the steel company or whoever it was. Yeah. It's just Kansas City in action of the pragmatic nature of being there's a problem. We are getting to work. We are going to fix this. You've already cleared the fact that this is happening. You've accepted that. And now it's, what do we have to do to rebuild this thing? Again, on the phone with them before it was even done. And yeah, the stuff on the history of Mahomes in Tyler, Texas, and that, Randy and her family outside of Tyler, all of that. Again, phenomenal job, phenomenal read for anybody from Kansas City. Couldn't urge you more to go and find that. It's one of those books too, I think, that is going to stand the test of time, and that it, your coffee table book, somebody picks it up, just starts skimming through it. You don't have to know everything at the beginning part of the book just to pick it up to any page and start reading. You can just read, like I said, one of those short stories about something, and you'll take something, I think, different away from it every time you read. But phenomenal job. Again, that's Rustin Dodd from The Athletic, one of the co-authors, along with Mark Dent, of the Kingdom Quarterback book. about a once swinging Cowtown chase, the ultimate comeback. A lot of pride. People in Kansas City will give you the history of why that is and why that will continue to be with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs doing what they're doing right now. Appreciate everybody for listening. Rustin, appreciate you for joining us. You can find the link to buy that book in the description of this show, both on YouTube and the podcast as well. Rustin, man, appreciate it.
Thanks, BJ. I really appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you guys next time. We'll get you covered for the upcoming final preseason game for the Chiefs against the Browns next Saturday with roster cut downs coming up Tuesday, August 29th. We'll have you covered here at the KC Sports Network.